He called her parents thrift store trash during the wedding vows, mocking their clothes, their presents, even their seats in the back row. But what he didn't know, they had just handed their daughter a $100 million inheritance before walking her down the aisle. And when she found out exactly what he said about them, she didn't cry. She detonated the wedding with one brutal move that made the internet explode.
On the 18th of August, 2024, in the gilded heart of Manhattan, the Donovan-Whitman wedding was set to be the social spectacle of the season, if not the year. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom, dripping with chandeliers and white peonies, had been transformed into what the press called a Versailles dream laced with Instagram filters. That morning, 3 different lifestyle blogs went live with teasers. The bride was stunning, the groom filthy rich, and their love story the stuff fairy tales are made of. But as the final seating chart was being adjusted and Mark Donovan was adjusting his cufflinks, the bride was staring into a mirror, thinking about a lie, or rather, a truth withheld. Diana Whitman had always known her parents were different. She didn't just mean the thrift store shoes or their bizarre refusal to ever accept money for anything other than flowers. She meant the way her father read the Financial Times like it was scripture, or how her mother casually dropped phrases like leverage buyout or Cayman vehicle during dinner. Once, when Diana was 12, she'd asked why they lived above a flower shop when most of her friends had backyard swimming pools. Regina had smiled and said, "Because peace and wealth rarely coexist, baby. We chose peace." And for most of her life, she believed them. She believed in their humility, their warmth, the way her father always tucked a fresh daisy into her school lunchbox, even in high school when it became mortifying. They taught her how to bake cornbread, how to patch jeans, how to tip well, even when you didn't have much. What they never taught her, never even hinted at, was that they were former billionaires who had walked away from their empire with nothing but a briefcase and a new identity. Until 2 months ago. It was a humid Thursday in June when she'd found the file. Tucked inside a creaky chest in the attic, under old Christmas ornaments and her baby clothes, was a manila envelope labeled, "For Diana, not before you're ready." Inside, portfolio sheets, shareholder documents, a deed to a beach estate in Turks and Caicos, and a note in her father's precise, blocky handwriting. "You are always the real wealth, but we figured you'd need this one day. You just inherited everything." And everything turned out to be $100 million. She'd kept it to herself, told no one, not even Mark. Especially not Mark. If you're enjoying this story, click subscribe, like this video, and comment what time it is that you're watching this video. Now, let's get back to the story. Mark, with his tailored grins and his champagne laugh, had always looked at her parents like they were broken antiques in a mansion. His version of generosity involved Instagrammable charity balls and speeches that sounded like TED Talks on ego. He wasn't evil, not exactly, but he was raised in a world where money wasn't a tool, it was a birthright, and if you didn't have it, you weren't worth knowing. Diana had started seeing the cracks not long after the engagement. The first red flag came wrapped in a joke. They were at brunch on Madison Avenue, the kind with $40 mimosas and waiters who judged your shoes. Mark had just finished retelling the story of his boarding school prank involving a Lamborghini and a Latin teacher when he glanced at the check and muttered, "Maybe we should invite your parents next time. It'd be fun to watch them figure out which fork to use." Diana laughed weakly at the time, but the taste lingered. Now, standing in her bridal suite, veil pinned, lips lined, she wondered if she was about to marry a man who thought her parents were charity cases. No, she knew he did. She'd heard the jokes, felt the sneers. She just convinced herself they didn't matter. But they did. Especially now that the truth was pounding in her chest like a secret drum. She was richer than every person in that ballroom, including the Donovans. And it changed nothing, except everything. A soft knock on the door pulled her out of her thoughts. "Come in," she said. It was her mother. Regina Whitman looked elegant in a deep navy dress that hugged her figure modestly. Her natural curls were pinned in a soft updo, and the only jewelry she wore was a thin gold band, her original wedding ring. She looked, Diana thought, like a woman who didn't need to prove a damn thing. "You look stunning," Regina said, voice warm, "like a queen who doesn't need a crown." Diana blinked back emotion. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Regina nodded, stepping closer.
"Why didn't you ever tell me about everything?" Regina tilted her head. "Because we didn't want it to shape you. We wanted you to become you, not a balance sheet." "But $100 million?" Diana whispered. We could have, we lived above a flower shop. You made me share a room with a humidifier." Regina chuckled. "And look how well you turned out. Do you regret who you are?" Diana bit her lip. "No. Then we did it right." They sat in silence for a beat, until Regina added, "He doesn't know, does he?" Diana shook her head. "Good," Regina said quietly, "because you need to see him as he is, not as he performs when money's on the line." Diana swallowed hard. "I want to believe he's better than that." Regina didn't answer. She didn't need to. By 3 p.m. the ballroom was buzzing. Chandeliers sparkled and people sparkled harder. The Donovans had flown in guests from Monaco and Milan. One of the groomsmen was a minor royal. Another had been on Forbes 30 Under 30 twice for 2 different startups. Charles and Regina Whitman walked in quietly, sitting at the far right row beside a hydrangea tower. Charles wore an old tan suit, pressed carefully. Regina clutched her clutch like it might vanish if she let go. Diana saw them as she entered the room, escorted by a quartet's soft strings and 117 cell phones held at various angles. She locked eyes with her father and felt the ground under her tighten. This was her real wealth. Everything else was noise. Then she glanced at Mark, standing at the altar, gleaming in a champagne tuxedo and forced humility, and she saw the smirk twitching at the corner of his mouth. That was the moment she knew. She might not go through with it. The ceremony was supposed to begin at 3:15 p.m. sharp, and by 3:14 everything sparkled, except the bride's conviction. Diana stood just beyond the ballroom doors, her maid of honor gently adjusting her train, the air thick with a perfume so expensive it smelled like anxiety in a bottle. Her heart thumped against her ribs like it wanted out. 1 minute, that's all she had before the music would swell and her life would either begin or unravel. Meanwhile, Mark Donovan stood beneath the arch of white roses, sipping attention like champagne. He loved a crowd, especially one filled with donors, CEOs, and media contacts disguised as friends. His groomsmen flanked him like a curated exhibit. Stanford, Wharton, a venture capitalist, and one actual baron. Their suits matched. Their smirks matched even harder. Mark glanced toward the crowd, then toward the double doors where Diana would enter. His expression was calm, confident, bored even. "Looks like the janitors wandered in by mistake," he muttered to his best man, gesturing toward Charles and Regina Whitman. The groomsmen snorted. "You sure they didn't crash this thing?" Mark smirked. "I'll let security deal with them once the photos are done." He wasn't whispering quietly enough. A few heads in the second row turned. One woman blinked in disbelief. Another lowered her phone and frowned. But Mark didn't notice. He was too busy editing his Instagram caption. Back behind the doors, Diana's legs suddenly felt heavy, like her body had caught up with what her heart already knew. "You okay?" her maid of honor asked. "Yeah, just nerves." "Totally normal," the woman said with a smile. "I was shaking like a loose chandelier at mine." Diana tried to smile back. It didn't land. She thought of her parents, her mother's calm wisdom, her father's warm silence, the years they spent giving everything and asking for nothing, not even the credit. And then she thought of Mark. Mark, who had once called her dad quaint for bringing her soup when she had the flu. Mark, who referred to her childhood home as adorably tragic. Why hadn't she seen it sooner? Because charm is camouflage, and Mark had camouflaged himself perfectly. The music began. The crowd stood. Diana took one slow breath, and the doors opened. Sunlight from the giant windows hit her gown like a spotlight. Phones rose, gasps fluttered. Every camera loved her. But her eyes weren't on the aisle. They were locked on one person, her father. Charles Whitman looked up at her with a softness that cracked something in her. His posture was dignified, his tan suit pressed, not expensive, but careful, respectable. Next to him, Regina's face was unreadable, but her hands were steady, unclenched. As Diana moved down the aisle escorted by a family friend, she felt each step become heavier. Mark smiled at her, that same smile he'd worn at the Met Gala, at his father's yacht club, at the gala fundraiser where they first met.
It was perfect. It was hollow. When she reached the altar, he leaned in and whispered, "Took you long enough." Diana didn't answer. She couldn't trust her voice. The officiant began the ceremony with the usual fanfare, welcoming the guests, thanking the families, quoting a poet neither of them had ever read. Then, just as he opened his mouth to begin the vows, Mark raised a finger. "Before we continue," he said, stepping forward, "I think it's time we address something important." Murmurs bubbled up. The officiant blinked. I'm sorry?" Mark turned to the audience. "Let's not pretend this isn't awkward. I mean, look around. My side's the Fortune 500. Her side, well, they brought coupons to the gift registry." Laughter. Not from everyone, just from the cruel, the confused, and the cowards. Diana froze. Mark pointed unapologetically at her parents. "Let's be honest, I'm marrying into poverty disguised as sentiment. It's charming, in a Dickensian way. Maybe we should have held this at a soup kitchen." The room fell silent. Gasps. One stifled sob. Even the violinist stopped playing under her breath. Diana stared at him, her throat closing. Her parents, still seated, didn't move. Her mother's lips pressed into a hard line. Her father stared at the floor, expressionless. And that's when it happened. Regina Whitman stood. No anger, no shouting, just a slow, deliberate rise. "You may be a Donovan," she said, voice clear and cool, "but you're also a fool." Mark laughed uncomfortably. "Excuse me?" "Sit down," the officiant whispered, trying to recover. But Regina kept going. "Do you even know who we are?" Mark smirked. "A florist and a housewife?" "Not quite." Charles stood next. Regina stepped forward, past the flowers, past the white chairs. "We once built one of the most successful private equity firms in the country before your father ever read his first term sheet." Charles added, "We sold it, cashed out, retired from a life of jets and boardrooms because we were sick of people like you." Mark blinked. "This is a joke." "It's not," Regina said. "And as of this month, Diana inherited everything we ever built, $100 million. She just didn't tell you." Mouths opened, eyes widened. A man dropped his wine flute. Mark's smirk twisted. "You're lying." "No," said Charles, "but you are every time you say you love our daughter." Diana stepped back from the altar. "You knew they weren't wealthy," she said, voice trembling. "And you treated them like trash anyway. What would you have done if you had known?" Mark was stunned silent. Diana looked at the officiant. "We're done here." Gasps. A woman in the back actually cheered. Diana turned, lifting her dress slightly as she descended the altar. Her mother reached out, took her hand. Charles placed a gentle hand on her back. They moved together, through the parted crowd, toward the ballroom doors. Mark remained standing, frozen, surrounded by white roses and shame. The officiant looked around. Well, you may now kiss your pride goodbye." Have you ever discovered someone's true character only after it was too late or almost too late? Drop a comment. What was your turning point moment like Diana's? The doors slammed shut behind her like punctuation. Diana didn't look back, not at the altar, not at the flowers, not at the man still standing there with disbelief dripping off his brow like bad cologne. She just kept walking, her dress hiked in one hand, her mother's fingers laced tightly in the other. Behind them, whispers burst like bubbles in a boiling pot. Did that just happen? Was that rehearsed? Did she say $100 million? Somewhere near the bar, a bridesmaid knocked back a shot of Patron and whispered, "I knew he was a dick." It was 3:47 p.m. In the span of 22 minutes, the most glamorous wedding in Manhattan had combusted into social ash. And yet, Diana felt more alive than she had in months. Out on the curb, the sun hit her like a kiss. A doorman, startled by the sight of a bride in full gown fleeing her wedding, stepped forward hesitantly. Do you need a car, miss?" Regina answered for her. "Yes, something discreet, something with legroom. And please, no champagne in the back." The man nodded and jogged to the driveway. Charles exhaled slowly like he'd been holding it for years. "Well," he said, watching the glass doors behind them, "that escalated." Diana let out a short laugh that caught halfway through her throat. "I think I just ruined the most expensive day of my life." "No," Regina said gently. "You just saved the rest of it." The car was a black Lincoln, the kind that didn't ask questions. Diana sat in the middle, clutching her train, still in full bridal armor. Her makeup was flawless. Her mascara hadn't even run, which was a miracle, considering her entire life had just pivoted like a hinge snapping off a gilded door. They pulled away from the Plaza Hotel as a small swarm of guests poured out onto the sidewalk like champagne foam. Phones were already out. A few people waved, confused. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked. "Anywhere that doesn't smell like lies," Diana muttered. Regina smiled. "Take us to 12th and West, the shop." The driver nodded. Diana looked at her mother. "Seriously? You want to go back to the flower shop now?" "Why not?" Regina replied. "It's the only place today that didn't pretend to be something it's not." They arrived 15 minutes later. The sign above the shop still read Whitman's Blooms, hand-painted, the S slightly crooked after all these years. The bell above the door jingled as they entered. It smelled like soil and lavender. Comfort. Diana hadn't been here in weeks, ever since the wedding planning had consumed her life and stolen every weekend. She wandered past the hydrangeas and eucalyptus bundles, past the antique register and faded wall photos. There was one of her, age 6, with a sunflower taller than her whole body. Another of Charles, grinning beside a rose display that had won some county fair ribbon. She turned to face her parents. "So, what now?" Charles was wiping his hands on an apron. "It depends. You want a hug, a drink, or an explanation? Can I have all three?" Regina handed her a jar of peach tea and pulled her in. "Of course, baby."
Diana buried her face in her mother's shoulder for a moment. Then, finally, she stepped back. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Charles leaned against the counter, voice low. "We started small. Bought our first tech company in '91. A nothing little CRM platform. Sold it 4 years later at a 600% return. From there, we moved into mergers, VC rounds, private equity. We built Whitman Holdings from scratch. By 2006, we were sitting on close to $300 million in liquid." Regina picked up. "Then came the big one, the healthcare data analytics firm. Quiet IPO, smart licensing, minimal exposure. That deal pushed us over $800 million. Diana blinked. "You're telling me we were billionaires?" "For exactly 9 months, Regina said. Then we sold everything, all of it. Stepped away." "Why?" Charles smiled faintly. "Because wealth doesn't keep you warm at night, or honest. We'd spent years building an empire and realized we didn't even know what we were anymore. And we wanted you to grow up real, not polished, not hollow, not like Mark." Diana sat on the stool behind the counter. "So, what now?" Charles was wiping his hands on an apron. "That depends. You want a hug, a drink, or an explanation? Can I have all three?" Regina handed her a jar of peach tea and pulled her in. "Of course, baby." Diana buried her face in her mother's shoulder for a moment. Then, finally, she stepped back. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." Charles leaned against the counter, voice low. "We started small. Bought our first tech company in '91. A nothing little CRM platform. Sold it 4 years later at a 600% return. From there, we moved into mergers, VC rounds, private equity. We built Whitman Holdings from scratch. By 2006, we were sitting on close to $300 million in liquid." Regina picked up. "Then came the big one, the healthcare data analytics firm. Quiet IPO, smart licensing, minimal exposure. That deal pushed us over $800 million. Diana blinked. "You're telling me we were billionaires?" "For exactly 9 months, Regina said. Then we sold everything, all of it. Stepped away." "Why?" Charles smiled faintly. "Because wealth doesn't keep you warm at night, or honest. We'd spent years building an empire and realized we didn't even know what we were anymore. And we wanted you to grow up real, not polished, not hollow, not like Mark." Diana sat on the stool behind the counter. "So, you kept this secret all these years?" Regina raised her eyebrow. "Have you ever heard us complain about taxes?" Diana laughed despite herself. "But seriously, you gave all this up to just work a flower shop?" Charles nodded. "Every day we see people buy something that makes them or someone else smile. There's no quarterly report for that, but it matters." Diana felt a lump rise in her throat again. Then she asked what she hadn't dared say until now. "Why give it to me now?" "Because you're ready, and because we saw where you were headed." Charles added, "That boy didn't love you. He loved your light, thought he could bend it." Diana stared at the wooden floor. "I almost married him. I almost walked right into a lifetime of being tolerated." "But you didn't," Regina said. "And now," Charles added, "you get to decide what kind of life you actually want." That night, Diana stayed in her childhood bedroom above the flower shop. She stripped off the gown, folded it, and tucked it into a box like a memory she was no longer afraid of. She pulled on an old t-shirt with a coffee stain on the collar and sat by the window. Below, the street buzzed gently. A couple walked by, holding hands and laughing about something only they understood. Somewhere, someone played jazz from a second-floor apartment. And Diana breathed, not like a bride who had been left at the altar, but like a woman who had walked away from a prison built in diamonds. The morning after what Manhattan tabloids dubbed the Great Plaza Implosion, Diana awoke to the sound of her phone vibrating like it was possessed. It was 6:03 a.m. on August 19th, and the first thing she saw when she opened her eyes wasn't the sun, it was 84 unread messages and 5 missed calls. The second thing she saw was the headline on her lock screen, courtesy of a news alert.
Billionaire bride walks out at altar. Groom's public humiliation sparks online frenzy. Beneath it, a pixelated photo of her in mid-stride, veil flying like a battle flag, Charles and Regina flanking her like royal guards. She didn't know whether to scream or laugh. Instead, she pulled the covers over her head. Downstairs, Regina was already arranging orchids, as if nothing world-shattering had occurred. Charles sipped black coffee, reading the Wall Street Journal like it was any other Tuesday. "You're famous," Regina said casually when Diana padded into the kitchen in her slippers. "I'm viral," Diana muttered. "There's a difference." Charles turned the page. "You made the homepage of the Times, dear. That's classy viral." Diana groaned and collapsed into a chair.
My inbox is on fire. Clients, friends, random strangers. Someone even offered me $50,000 to do an interview with a gossip podcast called Bridal Breakdown. Regina didn't look up. Take it. Put the money toward a real honeymoon. Solo. "I don't want a honeymoon," Diana said. "I want to disappear." Charles folded the paper. "You want a plan." That, Diana had to admit, was true. By 10 a.m., her name was trending on Twitter. Hashtags like Runaway Rich Girl and Plaza Showdown were everywhere. A slowed-down clip of her exiting the altar, eyes blazing, had been set to Beyoncé's Break My Soul and already hit 2 million views. But not everyone was cheering. The comment sections were a battlefield. "Good for her. Toxic men deserve to be embarrassed in public." "Spoiled girl throws tantrum because she didn't like daddy-in-law's caviar." "How do you inherit 100 mil and still act like a victim?" The truth had legs, but the internet had knives. Later that afternoon, a knock came at the shop door. Diana peered through the curtain. Mark. Of course. He was dressed down, in the way rich people dress down, designer jeans, a crisp black t-shirt that probably cost more than a month's rent in Brooklyn, and that same smug mouth that tried to pass for sincerity when the cameras weren't around. Diana opened the door halfway. Mark took off his sunglasses slowly, like he was in a movie he'd cast himself in. "We need to talk." "No, you need to apologize and then evaporate." "Look, I messed up. I was under pressure." "Oh, please," Diana snapped. "You humiliated my parents in public at our wedding. That wasn't pressure. That was who you are." Mark's voice dropped. "I didn't tell you you were rich. I didn't tell you because it shouldn't matter, but you made it matter. You treated them like garbage because you thought they had none." Mark scoffed. "So what, you're the hero now? Running away made you some kind of feminist icon?" Diana's stare hardened. "Leave." He said, "I'm serious. We can spin this, do damage control. We can say it was a misunderstanding, maybe even pivot it into a docuseries. Think of the reach." Diana blinked slowly. "You're trying to turn my humiliation into content?" "It's not humiliation if we profit from it." That was it. Diana stepped back and slammed the door in his face. She could hear him swearing on the sidewalk, kicking something. Maybe a flower pot. Good. Let him break something. That night, Regina poured her a glass of wine, and Charles made a pot of his infamous burble chili. They sat on the back porch, string lights overhead, the hum of the city softened by distance and familiarity. "You're not just famous," Regina said, swirling her glass. "You're at a crossroads." "I don't want to be," Diana murmured. "I wanted a normal life." Charles chuckled. "You were never built for normal." Diana sighed. "So what now? I'm rich, alone, and half the internet thinks I'm a brat." Regina leaned forward. "You have a platform, a bank account, a brain. Use them." "To do what?" "To tell the truth. Start with your story. Start with you." 2 days later, Diana opened a private blog. She called it Roots Before Riches. The first post was simple. "I didn't leave a man at the altar because I was dramatic. I left him because I realized that marrying someone who disrespects your parents, the people who taught you what love is a betrayal of everything you should stand for.
Yes, I inherited money. No, that doesn't make me shallow. But how someone treats people they think are poor, that reveals everything. It went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest. By the end of the week, she had 200,000 followers and a guest invitation from the Today Show. She declined the latter, but the former, she leaned into it. By the first week of September 2024, Diana Whitman had gone from runaway bride to reluctant icon. What began as a messy, viral exit from the altar had evolved into a national conversation. News outlets were dissecting her blog posts, debating her motives, even ranking her top 5 savage wedding moments. Every morning she woke up to emails from producers, literary agents, think pieces, and more marriage proposals than she could count, many of them disturbingly enthusiastic. Some people saw her as a modern-day Cinderella who fled the prince, others as a spoiled heiress weaponizing wealth for attention. But somewhere in the chaos, a strange thing happened. People started listening. Her blog, Roots Before Riches, had become a voice for others, especially women who had stories of being underestimated, talked over, or dismissed because they didn't come from money, or did, but refused to act like it made them better than anyone else.
One post in particular, titled "Manners Over Millions," exploded. You can't measure a person's worth by their net worth. You measure it by how they treat the waiter, the janitor, the woman they think has nothing to offer them. Because when someone thinks you're powerless, that's when they show you exactly who they are. It was reposted by everyone from influencers to professors to one former U.S. senator who quoted it on a panel about ethics and leadership. And all of it made Mark Donovan absolutely livid. Diana didn't see Mark again, but his shadow lingered. He'd launched a public relations comeback, hiring a crisis management firm and doing interviews where he used words like growth, clarity, and shared pain. He even managed to land a cover story in a glossy men's magazine titled "The Groom Who Grew Up," posing barefoot in a vineyard like he was harvesting humility. But Diana didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own rebuke. And besides, she had better things to focus on. On September 12th, Diana returned to the flower shop, not to hide, but to rebuild. She decided to relaunch it. Whitman's blooms had always been quiet and charming, but Diana saw a new future for it, a boutique floral company with a social edge. She renamed it Whitman and Root and launched a brand new mission. For every bouquet sold, a matching bouquet would be delivered free to someone in a hospital, a shelter, or a senior home. Because beauty belongs to everyone, she wrote on the news site. Her parents were stunned. "You're turning us into a movement," Charles said, pretending to be annoyed. "Damn right I am," Diana replied, grimming. Regina only smiled and handed her a stack of seed packets. "Start with these. Daisies. They're stubborn. They bloom where no one thinks they can." By late September, the store was buzzing. Orders flooded in. Press trickled in too. The good kind. Real stories. Real people. A local news anchor called her the flower heiress with a backbone. A magazine ran a feature titled, "She Said I Don't and Said Yes to Herself." But more than all of that, Diana felt something she hadn't in months. Clarity. And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. No envelope, hand-delivered. She opened it at the back of the shop while arranging sunflowers. "Diana, you don't know me, but I watched your story unfold like everyone else. I'm not writing for gossip. I'm writing because your words reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Dignity isn't loud, but it echoes. I've spent the last few years feeling like I had to earn respect through the size of my paycheck. You reminded me that kindness has more equity than most hedge funds. Thank you. Reese J. Avery. P.S. I own a garden center across the river. If you ever want to collaborate, or just grab a coffee,
I'd be honored. Diana read it twice. Rhys J. Avery. The name rang no bells. She Googled him. He was real. A small business owner, early 30s, ex-engineer, recently left corporate to start a sustainable nursery in New Jersey. Handsome in a quiet, thoughtful way. No Instagram fame, no yacht photos, no ego in sight. She set the letter down, unsure how to feel. But she smiled. Not the smile of someone ready to fall again, but the kind that cracks open a door you didn't realize had been locked. That weekend, she replied. Just one line. Coffee sounds good. Kindness does echo. I heard yours loud and clear. It was a Wednesday in late September when Diana stepped off the ferry at Hoboken Terminal, hair pulled into a low bun, oversized sunglasses shielding her from early autumn sun and any lingering recognition. The air smelled like roasted chestnuts and river wind. Across the street stood a cozy storefront with a sign that read, Avery's Roots, Sustainable Nursery and Garden Design. The bell jingled as she walked in. It smelled like loam, mint, and cedarwood. The shelves were stacked with terracotta pots, seed kits, biodegradable planters. A chalkboard near the register read, Plant something today your grandchildren will thank you for. Be right with you, came a voice from the back. And then he appeared. Rhys Avery. If Mark had been all sharp angles and designer polish, Rhys was the opposite. Tall, built like someone who actually worked with his hands, in faded jeans and a linen button-down rolled to the elbows. He had forest-colored eyes and the kind of smile that made you feel seen without being scanned. You're Diana, he said, not asking. You're Rhys, she replied, just as certain. He looked at her, took a second, and offered something rare in her world, a pause. Not to calculate, but to register. She could tell he wasn't just seeing the viral bride, he was seeing the person behind her.
Thanks for coming, he said. I wasn't sure if you'd write back. She shrugged. Wasn't sure either. But then again, I've done stranger things this month, like running out of $1 million wedding. Rhys grinned. Yeah, that made the gardening forums. She laughed. Of course it did. They didn't sit for coffee. Not at first. Rhys handed her a pair of gloves and said, Come on, help me repot these mums. Diana blinked. Seriously? You don't strike me as the latte and lecture type, he said. Let's talk while we work. So they did. For 2 hours they knelt on the concrete floor, scooping soil, clipping roots, and repotting fall blooms. It was strangely intimate. Dirt under her nails, her laughter echoing in the back room, Diana felt more grounded than she had in years. They talked, not about headlines, not about Mark, not about the blog. About childhood. About the first time Rhys built a birdhouse with his grandfather. About how Diana used to make flower crowns in the shop while her parents priced roses. About failure and burnout and what it meant to start over without shame. They finally sat outside on a bench beneath a creeping ivy wall, coffee in hand, gloves tossed aside. You know, Rhys said, your story hit hard. Not because of the wedding, but because you walked away from a lie, a comfortable lie. That's not easy. Diana looked at him. You've done it? He nodded. Quit my job at a defense contractor 3 years ago. 6-figure salary, bonuses, office view, but it felt like I was designing things to fill pockets, not lives. So you started this? He nodded. Built it with my brother. He passed last year, heart condition. But this place, it keeps me honest. Diana exhaled. That's what I want. Something honest. You already have it, he said. You just lit it on fire at the plaza. She smiled. Still not sure if that was bravery or a public breakdown. Maybe both, Rhys said. Maybe those things aren't always separate.
As the sun dipped, Reese walked her back to the ferry. They didn't make promises, no dates, no expectations, just a goodbye that felt more like a beginning. Diana returned to Manhattan feeling something she hadn't felt since before the proposal. Hope. Not the fairy tale kind, the earned kind. That weekend, Whitman and Root hosted its first community event, the Fall Bloom Giveaway. Hundreds of bouquets were prepped for delivery to shelters, cancer centers, nursing homes. Volunteers came, locals donated. And Diana? She stood by the front door, handing out free bundles of marigolds to passersby with a sign that said, "Beauty is for everyone. So is dignity." One woman, older, her hands wrapped in fingerless gloves, paused and whispered, "Thank you, sweetheart. No one's given me flowers in 30 years. Diana placed a second bouquet in her hands. "Then you're overdue." That night, as she closed the shop, her phone buzzed with a new message. Reese Avery. "Hey, those marigolds looked good on you. Dinner sometime? Something with actual silverware. My treat." Diana typed a reply, paused, then deleted it. Instead, she sent, "Only if we cook it ourselves. You bring herbs, I'll bring wine, and we'll plant something after." On the first Sunday of October 2024, Diana Whitman stood barefoot in her parents' small backyard garden, hands buried in cool soil, laughter ringing from her throat as Reese tried to identify basil from lemon balm and failed miserably. "That one's rosemary," she teased. He held it to his nose. "It's literally minty. You tricked me." "I did nothing. Nature is full of mysteries, like you thinking a potted herb was sage because it looked wise." They'd been seeing each other for 3 weeks. Not dating, not officially. More like slowly orbiting each other, letting time and truth stretch naturally. There were walks through farmers' markets, lazy evenings cooking together, a shared silence that never felt awkward. No cameras, no social media, no pressure. Diana didn't even tell her blog followers about him. She wanted this one thing to be hers alone. Back online, Roots Before Riches continued to grow, not just as a blog, but as a voice. Her latest post, "Things That Can't Be Bought," touched a nerve. You can buy a wedding. You can't buy a partner who sees you when no one's watching. You can buy a penthouse. You can't buy peace. You can buy followers, clicks, buzz, but integrity? That only comes from walking away when staying would make you small. The post went viral again. By now, she had stopped counting shares. But one comment caught her attention. "You didn't just walk out of a bad marriage, you walked back into yourself." She screenshotted it, saved it, because that was what this was really about. Not revenge, not optics, not even redemption. Just returning to herself. Meanwhile, Mark Donovan had gone full PR machine. Within weeks of the wedding debacle, he was seen dating a model turned influencer. Photos surfaced of them at a luxury resort in the Maldives, captioned, "New beginnings, ring." His team tried to pivot the scandal by releasing a pseudo-apology video filmed in black and white where Mark spoke about emotional maturity while sipping tea in an armchair that probably cost $9,000.
It backfired spectacularly. The internet smelled the performative grief and ripped it apart. And while Diana never once mentioned his name, her quiet success, the blog, the shop, the kindness, became its own form of justice. No rage, just roots. Then came the email that shifted everything. It was from the CEO of a national wellness brand. Subject: Partnership opportunity. We love what you're doing. Diana blinked. She opened it and read, "We'd like to collaborate with you on a floral and wellness campaign. Nationwide exposure, full creative control, and a 6-figure budget. You're exactly the kind of voice we need right now. Grounded, generous, real." She forwarded it to her parents. Charles replied, "Proud doesn't even cover it. Go grow." Regina just sent back a sunflower emoji and a heart. That weekend, Diana brought Reese to dinner at the house. It was the first time. He arrived with a basket of fresh herbs and a pie he insisted he baked himself. Regina raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Charles shook his hand, gave him the kind of nod that meant, "I'm watching you, but I like what I see." Over roast chicken and garlic potatoes, they talked about work, travel, plants, and movies. Reese didn't dominate the conversation. He didn't interrupt. He didn't flinch when Charles shared his investment strategies or when Regina shared stories from the pre-IPO days. He listened. And when Diana reached for his hand under the table, he didn't squeeze it like a prize. He held it like a promise. After dinner, as they stood under the porch light, Diana asked, "So, what is this?" Reese smiled. "I don't know, but I like it." She nodded. "Me too." He leaned in, kissed her. Not rushed, not cinematic, just real. The next morning, she posted a short update. Not a blog, just a note. Sometimes what grows in the wreckage is better than anything you planted on purpose. On October 22, 2024, Diana stood inside a Los Angeles film studio in a linen blazer and boots, flanked by bright lights and busier people. She had been flown out by the wellness brand that offered her the campaign deal, and this was day one of filming their nationwide Kindness is Currency initiative. The concept was simple. Diana would appear in a 3-part docu-style ad series blending florals, philosophy, and personal storytelling. But what caught her off guard wasn't the scale of it, was the silence between takes when a woman from production came over, eyes glassy, and whispered, "I left someone too, a long time ago, but no one clapped for me like they did for you." Diana took her hand. "I'm clapping now." Everywhere she went, people told her stories. A barista handed her an extra muffin with a wink and said, "He used to say I was too emotional. Thanks for proving emotion isn't weakness." A cab driver recognized her and said, "That man you left reminds me of my brother-in-law. You dodged a life of being unheard." An elderly woman in Pasadena stopped her in the grocery aisle and whispered, "Don't let the world make you hard, sweetheart. That's what they want. A bitter woman. You're better than that." That sentence stuck with her for days. On the plane ride back to New York, Diana opened her laptop and began writing a new piece. The Audacity of Softness. It's easier to become cold than it is to stay kind. It's easier to mock, withdraw, harden. But I'm learning that softness, real softness, is power. It's choosing gentleness in a world that keeps daring you to be cruel. It's refusing to trade peace for pettiness. It was her most shared piece yet. Hundreds of thousands of readers, thousands of messages, a few trolls, always, but their voices had grown faint. And among the hundreds of emails flooding her inbox, one stood out. Subject: Your wedding guest list is about to go viral. Attached, a screenshot from an anonymous gossip account. There was Mark, sitting beside his new influencer girlfriend at an event in Dubai, wearing a tux, holding champagne, while the girl loudly joked into a mic, "I told him, this time if we get married, maybe don't insult my family during the vows, okay?" The crowd laughed. Diana didn't. Not from anger. Just pity. How small the world must feel when your sense of worth is always on stage. When she returned to Manhattan, autumn had begun to sharpen its teeth. The leaves were turning bronze. The sidewalks were golden with reminders that nothing stays the same. and that some things are beautiful because they don't. Reese picked her up from the airport. They didn't hug immediately. They just looked at each other and he said, "You were missed." She said, "Were you counting the hours?" He said, "No, I counted the sunrises." She rolled her eyes, laughing. "Okay, poet." He leaned in. "I've been called worse." That weekend, they went hiking upstate. No phones, no headlines, just wind, trees, and hands that knew how to hold without squeezing. At the summit, Diana looked out at the valley below, leaves burning and sunset gold, and whispered, "I almost settled."
Reese didn't ask what she meant. He just said, "Yeah, I did too. Once." She turned to him. "You ever regret it?" He thought. "No," he said finally, "because if I hadn't, I might not have known how good this feels." She nodded, then leaned into his shoulder and said, "Let's not name this yet. Let's just grow it." Reese smiled. "Slow blooms are the best kind." That night, as they sat beside a campfire, she opened her notebook, a habit she'd reclaimed since stepping back from the noise, and wrote, "I used to think power was sharp. Now, I think it's patient." Exactly 75 days after she walked out of the plaza in a $12,000 gown and into chaos, Diana Whitman stood in front of a room full of women, entrepreneurs, activists, artists, and survivors, delivering the keynote speech at the Empower and Bloom conference in Brooklyn. She hadn't planned to speak publicly, but when the organizer, a woman who had left her own controlling marriage and rebuilt herself with nothing but a mini grant and a borrowed laptop, reached out and said, "Your story gave me the courage to leave," Diana couldn't say no. She stood in a black jumpsuit, no jewelry, no slides behind her, just a microphone and her truth. "I didn't leave a man. I left a version of myself that believed I had to shrink to be loved." Silence. Not heavy. Attentive. "I grew up thinking humility meant silence, that politeness meant endurance, that being a good woman meant forgiving disrespect until it broke me." Now she was pacing gently, eyes sweeping the room. "But that's not love. That's performance. And you don't owe anyone your dimming." She paused. "Leaving isn't always about slamming doors. Sometimes it's just choosing not to sit down when someone asks you to be less." A woman in the front row wiped tears. Another nodded, arms crossed tightly, like she'd been holding this revelation inside her bones. Diana smiled gently. "And one more thing," she said. "Softness isn't surrender. Kindness is not currency to be spent. It's the ground we grow from. And it's time we stop apologizing for being soil." Applause swelled. Not polite. Powerful. Afterward, dozens of women lined up to speak with her. Hugs, stories, letters pressed into her hands. One woman whispered, "I showed my teenage daughter your blog. She told me she wants to be fearless like you." Diana's eyes watered. "Tell her she already is," she whispered back. Back at the flower shop that evening, she found Reese on the roof, restringing the old fairy lights. "Did it go well?" he asked as she climbed the ladder beside him. "It went beyond, and terrifying, and also weirdly peaceful." He handed her a glass of cider. They sat under the stars,
legs dangling off the edge like kids. "You ever think," he said slowly, "about what might have happened if you hadn't walked out?" "All the time," she replied. "You regret it?" She looked out over the skyline. "No," she said. "I mourn it, but I don't regret it." He nodded. "Love that." Then, after a beat, he asked, "So, are we naming this yet?" She smiled sideways. "Only if we're planting it, too." He laughed. "Deal." On November 5th, the Kindness is Currency campaign officially launched nationwide. Her face, soft, strong, centered in a garden of wildflowers, appeared on digital billboards in Times Square and LAX. The tagline beneath it read, "Kindness isn't weakness. It's the seed of everything." The internet did what the internet does. It speculated, gossiped, memed, adored, and moved on. But Diana didn't. She stayed. She bloomed. Not louder, not richer, just rooted. She ran Whitman and Root with her parents, wrote monthly essays, co-launched a scholarship fund for young women in underserved communities, built a home library, took Sundays off, learned to say no with grace. She never married Mark. She never missed him either. At New Year's Eve, Diana hosted a small dinner on the shop's roof. 10 chairs, homemade food, flowers everywhere. Reese kissed her at midnight beneath a string of lights. No cameras, no audience, just 2 hands intertwined, and the sound of things blooming.